She received divorce papers on her birthday, but the real surprise came later. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if you have ever watched one painful ending become the beginning of something better, stay with this story until the end. At 7:12 on the morning of her 43rd birthday, Evelyn Carter opened the front door expecting flowers. She was still wearing the pale blue robe her daughter had given her the previous Christmas, and one side of her hair was flattened from sleep. Behind her, the old grandfather clock in the hallway was striking the quarter hour. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen, where a small chocolate cake sat under a glass cover because Evelyn had learned long ago that if she wanted a birthday cake in that house, it was safer to buy one herself. The man on the porch was not holding flowers. He wore a gray jacket, carried a leather folder, and asked, "Evelyn Marie Carter." Something in his voice made her tighten her hand around the edge of the door. "And yes." He checked her face against a paper clipped to the folder. "You've been served." The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and heavier than it looked. He placed it in her hands with the careful distance of someone who delivered bad news for a living, then walked down the stone path without wishing her a happy birthday. For several seconds, Evelyn remained in the doorway. The neighborhood was waking around her. A sprinkler clicked across the lawn next door. A school bus sighed at the corner. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and stopped. Everything looked insultingly normal. She closed the door and carried the envelope to the dining table. Her husband's name appeared on the first page. Nathaniel James Carter, petitioner. Evelyn Marie Carter, respondent. Petition for dissolution of marriage. She read the first 3 lines once, then again, then a third time, as if repetition might force the words to rearrange themselves into something less cruel. They did not. Nathan wanted a divorce after 19 years of marriage. He wanted exclusive use of the lake house, his full interest in Carter urban development, and a rapid division of their personal property. He claimed the marriage had suffered an irretrievable breakdown. He also requested that each party retain the assets held in his or her own name. That final sentence was almost funny. Almost. Because for 19 years, nearly everything important had been held in Nathan's name. The company, the investment accounts, the lake house, the downtown apartment they rarely used. Even the car Evelyn drove had been purchased through Carter Urban Development for tax efficiency. Nathan had always said there was no reason to complicate their marriage with separate ownership. They were a team. What was his was hers. What was hers was theirs. But now, on paper, what was his. Evelyn turned to the attached financial disclosure and saw that Nathan valued her contribution to nearly 2 decades of marriage at $250,000, payable over 5 years. $50,000 a year. Less than the annual salary of the junior designers she had once trained. Her coffee cooled beside her untouched. On the 4th page, she found a handwritten note tucked between legal forms. "Eve, I'm sorry this had to happen today. My attorney said delaying service would create complications. I didn't want a scene. I'll stay at the Mercer apartment for now. Please communicate through counsel until we can speak calmly. Nathan." She stared at the note until the letters blurred. He had signed it Nathan. Not Nate, the name she had called him since they were 24 and broke and eating boxed noodles on the floor of their first apartment. Not love, not even I'm sorry. Nathan. Formal, clean, finished. Her phone buzzed on the table. For one wild moment, she thought it might be him. It was a message from their 17-year-old daughter, Sophie, sent from the upstairs bedroom. "Happy birthday, Mom. Don't come up yet, I'm working on something." Evelyn covered her mouth with both hands. The sound that escaped her was not quite a sob. It was smaller than that, almost embarrassed, as if even her grief had spent years learning not to take up too much space. She gathered the papers, returned them to the envelope, and slid the envelope beneath a stack of mail, just as Sophie came down the stairs carrying a breakfast tray. "Surprise," Sophie said. She had arranged 2 pieces of toast into a heart and placed a strawberry in the center. A yellow paper crown sat beside the plate, glittered with the words "Best Mom in the World." Evelyn stood so quickly that her chair scraped the floor. Sophie's smile faded. "What's wrong?" Nothing, Evelyn forced air into her lungs. I'm overwhelmed, this is beautiful. Dad said he had an early meeting, but he promised he'd be home for dinner. The lie arrived so casually that Evelyn nearly flinched. Nathan had not told Sophie. He had served divorce papers on Evelyn's birthday and left their daughter believing he would return for cake. Evelyn walked around the table and hugged her. Sophie laughed. Mom, you're crushing the toast. Sorry, Evelyn loosened her arms, but she did not let go. She pressed her face into Sophie's hair and tried to memorize the certainty of that moment. Her daughter warm and real, the morning sunlight across the floor, the faint smell of strawberry shampoo. Whatever happened next, she would not allow Nathan's decision to destroy Sophie's last year at home. At least that was what she told herself. By 9:30, 3 flower arrangements had arrived from Nathan's office. The cards were signed by employees, not by him. One bouquet came from the executive team at Carter Urban. Another came from the accounting department. The third came from Thomas Hale, Nathan's longtime business partner and Evelyn's oldest friend at the company. Happy birthday to the person who made the beginning possible, Thomas had written. Evelyn read the line twice. Then she carried the bouquet into the study and locked the door. The study had once been hers. Before Sophie was born, Evelyn had worked there late into the night, drafting plans while Nathan handled contractors and permits. The shelves still held architectural books she had purchased in college, though Nathan's awards now occupied most of the room. Framed magazine covers showed him standing in front of glass towers and renovated warehouses, always described as a visionary builder who had transformed the city's river district. None of the articles mentioned Evelyn. She had told herself for years that recognition did not matter. She knew what she had contributed. Nathan knew. Henry Carter, Nathan's father, had known. Thomas knew. The first dozen employees knew. That had once felt like enough. Now, surrounded by proof of how easily a shared history could be rewritten, it felt like nothing. She opened the bottom drawer of the desk and removed a flat black portfolio. Inside were the original sketches for Carter Urban's first successful project, the rehabilitation of the abandoned Bellwether Mill. Evelyn had drawn the initial concept on the back of grocery receipts because they could not afford proper drafting paper at the time. She had imagined loft apartments built around the old brick walls instead of tearing them down. She had added a public courtyard, preserved the iron beams, and designed affordable studio spaces for local artists. Nathan had sold the idea. Evelyn had built the soul of it. The project saved them from bankruptcy and launched his career. She ran her fingers over her own faded pencil lines. A knock came at the study door. Mom, Sophie called, are you hiding from your birthday? Evelyn closed the portfolio, just answering messages. Can I come in? Give me 1 minute. She slid the portfolio back into the drawer, but before she could stand, her phone rang. The screen showed an unfamiliar local number. She almost ignored it, then something made her answer. Mrs. Carter, a woman asked. And yes. My name is Margaret Bell. I'm calling from Bell, Rosen, and Pike. We represented your late father-in-law, Henry Carter. Evelyn sat very still. Henry had died 11 months earlier after a short illness. In the final years of his life, he had become more father to Evelyn than Nathan had been a husband. Henry had noticed the absences no one else commented on. Nathan's increasingly late nights, the business trips that stretched through weekends, the way Evelyn stopped speaking in groups because Nathan corrected her every time she tried. What can I do for you? Evelyn asked. I believe the more important question is what we can do for you. We received notice this morning that a petition for dissolution was filed in your marriage. Evelyn looked toward the locked door. How would you know that? Mr. Carter instructed us to monitor certain legal filings after his death. He also left a sealed directive that was to be delivered to you if one of 3 events occurred. What events? I would prefer to explain in person. Are you available today? Evelyn almost laughed. It's my birthday. There was a pause. Yes, Margaret said gently. Mr. Carter knew that too. A chill moved through Evelyn. What are you talking about? Mrs. Carter, your father-in-law left you a birthday gift, but because of the divorce filing, it is no longer only a gift. It may be the most important protection you have. Evelyn looked at the envelope of divorce papers hidden beneath the mail. What kind of protection? Margaret's answer was careful. The kind your husband does not know exists. Margaret Bell's office occupied the top floor of an old limestone building 2 blocks from the courthouse. By noon, rain had begun tapping against its tall windows, turning the city gray and reflective. Evelyn sat across from Margaret at a polished walnut table. Beside the attorney was a narrow man with silver glasses named David Rosen, the firm's trust specialist. Between them rested a sealed cedar box, no larger than a book. Margaret did not begin with legal language. She poured Evelyn a cup of tea and said, "Henry was worried about you." Evelyn looked down at her hands. He never said that. He believed saying too much would make your situation worse. He also believed you had spent most of your marriage protecting everyone except yourself. That sounded exactly like Henry. Margaret slid a document across the table. Do you recognize this? At the top were the words Bellwether Development Agreement. The document was dated 18 years earlier. Evelyn remembered signing it in a hot temporary office beside the abandoned mill. Sophie had been 6 months old and asleep in a carrier against her chest. Nathan had been outside arguing with an electrician. Henry had arrived with a notary and told her the papers protected her design work until the company could afford to pay her properly. She had signed while bouncing Sophie with one foot. I haven't seen this in years, Evelyn said. Your husband may not have seen it since that day, David replied, but Henry preserved the original. The agreement documented Evelyn's architectural concepts, her contribution of $180,000 from an inheritance left by her grandmother, and her right to receive an ownership interest in the company created to develop the property. Evelyn frowned. Nathan told me the company bought back that interest when we refinanced. Did you sign a sale or transfer? I signed hundreds of things. Not this. David placed another document beside the first. The interest was never repurchased. It was exchanged during restructuring for non-dilutable founder units. Those units were later placed in a holding trust by Henry, along with his own voting shares. I don't understand. Margaret opened the cedar box. Inside was a letter in Henry's uneven handwriting, and a dark blue folder marked the BELLWEATHER Trust. Henry controlled 52% of Carter Urban's voting shares, Margaret said. Nathan controls most of the remaining economic interest, which is why he receives the majority of profits and has publicly operated as the company's owner. But control and economic ownership are not always the same thing. Evelyn stared at her. After Henry died, those voting shares did not pass to Nathan. They remained in trust. Who is the trustee? You are, upon acceptance. The rain against the windows seemed to disappear. Evelyn heard only her own breaths. No, she said, that can't be right. The trust was structured to remain dormant while your marriage was intact and while Nathan managed the company responsibly. Henry included several activation events. Your death, Nathan's attempt to sell the company, evidence of major financial misconduct, or the filing of a divorce petition by Nathan without a negotiated property agreement. Evelyn felt the room tilt slightly. This morning, Margaret continued, 2 activation events occurred. David turned a tablet toward her. A flow of transfers appeared on the screen, moving from Carter Urban accounts into a company called Mercer Strategic Holdings. Henry hired an independent accounting firm to review the company after his death, David said. The trust gave them limited monitoring authority. During the last 9 months, approximately $3.4 million has been transferred to Mercer Strategic Holdings under consulting and acquisition development agreements. Evelyn recognized the name immediately. The apartment where Nathan said he would stay was in the Mercer building. More importantly, Vanessa Mercer was Carter Urban's vice president of acquisitions. Vanessa was 36, brilliant, polished, and always perfectly prepared. She had joined the company 4 years earlier and risen faster than anyone in its history. At holiday parties, She complimented Evelyn's dresses and asked for marriage advice. The previous spring, she had sent Evelyn a handwritten note thanking her for sharing Nathan with the company. Evelyn had thought the wording strange. Now it felt like mockery. "Who owns Mercer Strategic Holdings?" Evelyn asked, though she already knew. "Vanessa Mercer owns 40%, David said. "The remaining 60% is held through another entity we have not fully traced. We have reason to believe Nathan has a beneficial interest." "So he's moving money out of Carter Urban." "That appears possible. We cannot make a final accusation until the forensic audit is complete." "And he filed for divorce because he thinks the company belongs to him." Margaret's expression tightened. "His petition describes his Carter Urban stock as separate property inherited from Henry. That claim is inaccurate. It also omits the Bellwether founder units entirely." "Maybe he forgot." Evelyn heard the bitterness in her own voice. David removed his glasses. "Mrs. Carter, people forget anniversaries. They rarely forget ownership interests worth tens of millions of dollars." The number did not feel real. Tens of millions. That morning, Nathan had offered her $250,000 spread over 5 years. Evelyn looked at Henry's letter. "May I read it?" Margaret pushed the cedar box toward her. The envelope was addressed in Henry's hand. "For Evelyn, on the birthday when she finally needs to remember who she is." Her fingers trembled as she opened it. "My dear Eve, if you are reading this, then I was right about something I prayed I was wrong about. I have loved my son all his life, but love does not require blindness. Nathan has always been talented. He can enter a room, see what people want, and make them believe he was born to provide it. That gift built much of his success. It also taught him to confuse applause with truth. You were the truth in his life. You designed Bellwether when everyone else saw a dead factory. You invested the money your grandmother left you when Nathan and I could not get another bank loan. You worked without salary, raised Sophie, cared for Nathan's mother through her illness, and stepped away from your own license because the company and family needed you. Then, little by little, your work became Nathan's story. I watched you allow that because you loved him. I watched him accept it because it benefited him. That is my shame as much as his. The shares in this trust are not charity. They are not revenge. They are recognition of what was always yours. If Nathan has filed for divorce without first treating you fairly, the trust gives you voting control of Carter Urban. Use it carefully. Do not destroy the company to punish my son. Hundreds of families depend on it, but do not surrender it merely to keep peace. Peace purchased by erasing yourself is only a quieter form of suffering. There is one more thing you must know. The Riverlight project, currently being promoted as Nathan's greatest vision, began with the plans you drew 15 years ago for the East River neighborhoods. I found them in the archive. Nathan knows where the idea came from, even if he has convinced himself otherwise. Return to your work, Eve. You were never standing behind a great man. He was standing in front of a woman no one had been allowed to see. Happy birthday, Henry. By the time Evelyn reached the final line, tears had fallen onto the paper. She did not wipe them away. For 19 years, she had trained herself to explain every hurt until it sounded reasonable. Nathan missed dinner because the company needed him. Nathan took credit because investors preferred one clear leader. Nathan laughed at her ideas in meetings because he wanted to challenge her. Nathan stopped touching her because stress had changed him. Nathan kept his phone turned face down because executives needed privacy. Henry's letter did not explain anything away. It named what had happened. Evelyn had disappeared inside her own life. Margaret waited until Evelyn folded the letter. What happens if I accept the trusteeship? Evelyn asked. You gain authority to vote the trust's shares, Margaret said. That includes the power to call a special board meeting, appoint or remove directors, authorize an independent audit, and, if necessary, replace executive leadership. Can Nathan challenge it? He can challenge anything. Winning is another matter. What happens in the divorce? Your founder units and the underlying contractual rights become central. So does the alleged diversion of marital and corporate assets. His proposed settlement will not survive serious review. Evelyn looked at the city through the rain-streaked glass. At that moment, she could have said yes. She could have signed the acceptance, called a board meeting, and had Nathan removed before dinner. The idea burned through her with such force that it frightened her. Instead, she asked, "How many employees does Carter Urban have now?" "Directly, 812, David said. "With active contractors, the number is much higher. And if the company is dragged into a public war, projects could stall, financing partners could panic. The trust gives you power, but Henry was right, it must be used carefully." Evelyn pressed her palm over the cedar box. "I need 24 hours. Margaret nodded. "You have 30 days to accept formally, but we recommend immediate protective steps. Open a bank account in your own name. Preserve every personal and business record you can lawfully access. Do not confront Nathan about the trust or audit, and retain independent divorce counsel." "Do you know someone?" Margaret almost smiled. "I know exactly who Henry wanted you to call." The attorney's name was Naomi Brooks. By 2 o'clock, Evelyn was sitting in Naomi's office 3 floors below, watching a woman in a red jacket tear Nathan's divorce petition apart with a yellow highlighter. "He chose your birthday?" Naomi asked. His attorney said delaying would create complications. His attorney did not choose the process server's route. Your husband chose the date he filed. Evelyn looked away. Naomi softened her voice. "I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it because the first job in a case like this is to stop protecting the person who planned how to surprise you." Surprise. The word followed Evelyn home. When she entered the kitchen at 4:30, Sophie had hung gold streamers from the cabinets. A banner stretched above the table, the letters uneven because Sophie had drawn them by hand. "Happy 43, Mom. You make everything home." On the counter sat groceries for Evelyn's favorite dinner: lemon chicken, roasted potatoes, and green beans with almonds. "Dad still isn't answering," Sophie said from the stove, "but he probably got trapped in that Riverlight meeting." Evelyn placed her purse on a chair. She had rehearsed 10 different ways to tell her daughter. Every version sounded either too cruel or too dishonest. "Sophie, turn off the burner." Her daughter glanced over. "Why?" "Please." Something in Evelyn's face made Sophie obey. They sat at the table, beneath the handmade banner. Evelyn took Sophie's hands. "Your father isn't coming home tonight." Sophie rolled her eyes with a teenager's practiced disappointment. "I knew it." "He isn't coming home tomorrow either." The eye roll stopped. "What happened?" "This morning, I received papers. Your father has filed for divorce." Sophie pulled her hands away. "No." "I'm sorry." "No, he would have told me." "He should have." "You're fighting, that's all. He gets dramatic when he's stressed." Evelyn said nothing. Sophie stood, knocking her chair backward. "Call him." "I have called." "Then I will." She grabbed her phone and walked toward the living room. Evelyn remained at the table, listening. Nathan answered on the second ring. "Dad," Sophie's voice broke immediately, "Mom says you filed for divorce." There was a long silence. Then Nathan said something Evelyn could not hear. Sophie turned toward the kitchen, her face pale. "Today," she demanded, "you did this today." Another pause. "No, don't tell me it was the lawyer, you signed it." Evelyn closed her eyes. Sophie began to cry. "You promised you'd come for dinner." Whatever Nathan said next made her expression change. The hurt remained, but something colder entered it. "Who is Vanessa?" Evelyn opened her eyes. Sophie stared straight ahead, listening. Then she whispered, "I hate you," and ended the call. The phone slipped from her hand onto the couch. Evelyn crossed the room, but Sophie stepped back. "You knew?" Sophie asked. "I suspected something only after I saw the papers. He said he's in love with her. He said they didn't plan for it to happen." The oldest sentence in the history of betrayal. Evelyn wanted to say it aloud, but Sophie's world was collapsing too. "He said he has been unhappy for years," Sophie continued, Were you? Evelyn could not answer with a lie. We lost our way a long time ago. I kept believing we could find it again. Did you love him? Yes. Do you still? Evelyn looked at the wedding ring on her left hand. Love did not vanish simply because truth arrived. Sometimes truth only revealed how much of love had survived alone. I don't know what I feel right now, she said. Sophie's face crumpled. This time, when Evelyn reached for her, she came willingly. They sank onto the couch and held each other while the dinner burned in the kitchen. At 6:40, the smoke alarm began to scream. Neither of them moved until it stopped on its own. Nathan came to the house the next morning at 10. He did not use his key. He rang the bell like a guest. Evelyn had already been awake for hours. She had changed the passwords on her personal email, photographed every document in the home safe, opened a bank account in her own name, and removed Henry's letter from the cedar box to keep it with Naomi. She had also taken off her wedding ring. The pale band of skin around her finger looked more intimate than the ring ever had. When she opened the door, Nathan stood on the porch in a charcoal overcoat. He was 50, still handsome in the controlled, camera-ready way that had helped turn him into the face of Carter Urban. His dark hair was silvering at the temples. His expression carried the careful sorrow of a man who expected to be forgiven for behaving badly because he looked troubled while doing it. I came for some clothes, he said. Sophie is at school. I know. Of course he knew. He had waited until she was gone. Evelyn stepped aside. Nathan entered and looked around the foyer as if checking whether she had broken anything. His gaze paused on her bare left hand. That was fast. The papers were clear. Eve, I didn't want you served on your birthday. But you filed 3 days before it. My attorney said. Your attorney has become very powerful. He chooses filing dates, delivery dates, financial terms, and apparently the woman you sleep with. Nathan's jaw tightened. I don't want to fight. You should have written that in your petition. Somewhere between asking for both houses and pretending I had nothing to do with the company. The company is not personal property. It has investors, debt, employees. Splitting it would be irresponsible. I didn't ask to split it. Your lawyer will. You've already heard from my lawyer. No, but I know how these cases go. Evelyn almost smiled. Nathan had spent one night away and was already speaking as if he were an expert on divorce. He removed his gloves one finger at a time. The settlement is meant to give you security without dragging us through years of litigation. $250,000. Plus your personal savings. My personal savings total $14,000. You've never had to worry about money. Because I trusted you with it. Nathan exhaled. I knew you would see this as betrayal. What other category would you suggest? Our marriage has been over for years. That would have been useful information while I was still in it. You knew we weren't happy. I knew you were absent. I knew you stopped speaking to me unless you needed a suit picked up or a donor's wife entertained. I knew you treated every concern I raised as evidence that I was emotional. What I did not know was that you had decided those things ended our marriage while still enjoying every benefit of having a wife. He looked toward the stairs. Vanessa is not the reason we failed. No, Vanessa is what you chose to do after we failed quietly enough for your comfort. His face changed at that. Evelyn saw a flicker of the young man he had once been, the one who hated being seen too clearly. I love her, he said. The sentence hurt, but not as much as she had feared. Perhaps because the man saying it did not sound brave. He sounded rehearsed. How long? Nathan hesitated. How long have you been sleeping with her? About a year. Henry had died 11 months ago. Evelyn absorbed the timing. Were you with her while your father was dying? That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with who you became. Nathan picked up the suitcase he had left near the coat closet after his last business trip. I'm not going to stand here and be judged. You came here. I came for clothes. Then take them. He stopped at the foot of the stairs. Vanessa understands the pressure I'm under. She believes in what I'm building. Evelyn felt something inside her go still. I believed in it before there was anything to build. That's not what I meant. It is exactly what you meant. You want someone who looks at the finished tower and calls you extraordinary. You no longer remember the woman who stood in the mud with you before the foundation was poured. Nathan's eyes hardened. You chose to leave architecture. I chose our family. You always say that like someone forced you. Your mother was dying, Sophie was a baby. The company could not pay for both a project architect and a construction manager. You asked me to step back for 1 year. And you never returned. Because every year there was another reason you needed me somewhere else. He gave a tired shake of his head. This is why we can't communicate. No, Nathan, this is the first honest conversation we've had in years. He went upstairs. Evelyn stood in the foyer, listening to drawers open and closet doors slide. She expected herself to collapse after he left. Instead, she noticed small things. The silence between sounds. The sunlight on the stair rail. The fact that her heart was beating steadily. Nathan returned 20 minutes later with 2 suitcases and a garment bag. At the door, he paused. I want us to handle this with dignity. Evelyn opened the door for him. Then start behaving in a way that deserves it. He walked out without answering. At 11:15, she called Margaret. I'm ready to accept the trusteeship. The formal signing took less than an hour. A blue pen, 6 signatures, 2 witnesses, 19 years of silence converted into voting authority with the turn of a page. But Evelyn did not feel powerful. She felt responsible. Her first action as trustee was to authorize the forensic audit. Her second was to direct that no major company asset could be sold, pledged, or transferred without board approval. Her third was to schedule a special board meeting for the following Friday. Margaret advised waiting longer. Naomi wanted to file emergency motions first. David wanted another week of financial records. Evelyn listened to all of them, then said, if Nathan is moving money, every extra day gives him time. By Thursday afternoon, the first results confirmed her concern. Mercer Strategic Holdings had received millions in consulting fees for work performed largely by Carter Urban employees. It had also signed options to purchase 3 riverfront parcels from Carter Urban at below-market prices once zoning approval for Riverlight was finalized. The options were buried in hundreds of pages of project agreements. If completed, the arrangement would transfer some of the most valuable land in the city to Vanessa's company, then allow it to resell or lease the land back after public improvements raised its value. Carter Urban would carry the risk. Mercer Strategic would collect the gain. There was more. The Riverlight project had been approved by the city partly because Carter Urban promised that 30% of its residential units would remain affordable for working families. Internal drafts showed Nathan and Vanessa planned to reduce that commitment after final zoning approval, replacing affordable apartments with luxury short-term residences. Evelyn read the report in the same study where she had once drawn the original Riverlight concept. 15 years earlier, she had envisioned a neighborhood where nurses, teachers, restaurant workers, and young families could live near downtown instead of being pushed farther away by every new development. Her sketches included public gardens, a childcare cooperative, river access, and mixed-income housing built around shared courtyards. Nathan had taken the shape of her idea and removed its purpose. That betrayal cut differently from the affair. The affair had stolen her husband. Riverlight had stolen her voice. On Friday morning, Evelyn walked into Carter Urban headquarters for the first time in almost 3 years. The lobby occupied the restored turbine hall of Bellwether Mill. Sunlight poured through 60-foot windows. The original brick walls remained exposed, exactly as she had drawn them. Suspended above the reception desk was a steel sculpture made from salvaged factory gears. A brass plaque near the entrance read, BLLWATHER Mill, reborn through the vision of Nathaniel J. Carter. Evelyn stopped in front of it. She had passed that plaque dozens of times without allowing herself to feel anything. Now the words seemed almost childish in their certainty. Mrs. Carter. The receptionist stood behind the desk, startled. Hello, Mia. You remember me. You started as an intern in community planning. You brought your father to the holiday dinner because he was visiting from Arizona. Mia's face brightened. That was 8 years ago. I remember people better than titles. As Evelyn crossed the lobby, employees began to notice her. Some smiled, some whispered. A few looked away, clearly aware of the divorce. News traveled quickly in a company built around one family's name. Thomas Hale met her at the elevator. He was 61, broad-shouldered, and perpetually rumpled, as though every suit had lost an argument with him. He had worked beside Nathan and Henry from the company's first day. In old photographs, Thomas was usually the man carrying lumber while Nathan spoke to reporters. When he saw Evelyn, his eyes filled. Henry told me I might see you here one day, he said. You knew about the trust. Not the details, only that he had made provisions. And you never told Nathan. Henry made me swear. Were you also aware of Mercer Strategic? Thomas looked toward the elevator doors. Not until 3 months ago. I asked Nathan about the consulting fees. He said Vanessa had developed proprietary acquisition models and that the board had approved the arrangement. Did the board approve it? No, he used authority under an older executive resolution. Technically, he may have had power to sign the first agreement. He did not have the right to conceal his personal interest. You think he owns part of Mercer Strategic? I think Vanessa promised him they would own it together after the divorce. The elevator arrived. Inside, Thomas pressed the button for the executive floor, but did not release it immediately. Eve, there's something I should have said years ago. She waited. I watched Nathan take more credit than he earned. I told myself you were comfortable with the arrangement. It was easier than challenging him. Yes, Evelyn said. I told myself the same thing. The boardroom had changed since her last visit. A 40-foot digital wall displayed the Riverlight skyline, towers shining beside the river, tiny people walking through perfect parks, every window reflecting a permanent sunset. Nathan stood at the head of the table. Vanessa sat to his right. She wore a white suit and no visible expression. 6 other directors filled the room, along with corporate counsel and 2 representatives from the auditing firm. Margaret and David entered behind Evelyn. Thomas took his usual seat but left the chair beside him empty for her. Nathan stared at Evelyn as if she had arrived at a private dinner without invitation. What is she doing here? He asked. Corporate counsel, a woman named Laura Chen, cleared her throat. Mrs. Carter is attending as trustee and voting representative of the Bellwether Trust. Nathan did not move. Vanessa turned toward him. What trust? Laura placed a folder on the table. The trust established by Henry Carter holds 52% of the company's Class A voting shares. Nathan laughed once. It was a sharp, disbelieving sound. My father's shares transferred to me. His economic distributions transferred according to the estate plan, Laura said. His voting shares remained in trust. That's impossible. I reviewed the documents this morning. They are valid. Nathan looked at Thomas. You knew. I knew Henry had a plan. I did not know what it was. Then Nathan looked at Evelyn. For the first time since she had known him, he seemed unable to find words. Evelyn sat down. The meeting will come to order, she said. You can't call this meeting, Nathan snapped. I already did. You know nothing about running this company. The insult landed in the room like a dropped glass. Several directors lowered their eyes. Evelyn looked toward the digital image of Riverlight. I know the childcare center shown on the East Block was removed from the current budget 6 months ago, though it remains in every presentation to the city. I know the affordable housing commitment will be reduced from 30% to 12%, under the post-approval phasing plan. I know 3 parcels are under option to Mercer Strategic Holdings for less than 60% of their projected value. And I know Carter Urban has paid that company $3.4 million for services mostly performed by our own employees. Vanessa's face lost color. Nathan placed both hands on the table. Those are preliminary structures. You don't understand the financing. Then explain it. This is confidential. We are in a board meeting. The audit was unauthorized. The trust authorized it. I am the chief executive officer. And the board supervises the chief executive officer. Nathan's gaze burned into her. This is revenge. No, revenge would be destroying what we built because you hurt me. I am here to prevent you from destroying it because you believed no one could stop you. Vanessa pushed back her chair. I will not sit here while my professional reputation is attacked by a bitter spouse. Evelyn turned to her. Did Mercer Strategic agree to give Nathan an ownership interest after his divorce was final? Vanessa froze. The silence answered before she did. Margaret slid copies of an email across the table. It had been recovered from a company archive Vanessa believed she had deleted. Once the personal situation is resolved, the Mercer equity will be ours without Eve or Henry's old restrictions. Riverlight can finally become what it should have been. Nathan did not look at the email. He looked at Vanessa. You wrote that from your company account. I was speaking conceptually. You said those messages were gone. Every person in the room heard the admission. Laura Chen closed her eyes briefly. Evelyn felt no triumph, only exhaustion. She presented 3 resolutions. The first suspended all contracts with Mercer Strategic Holdings pending investigation. The second placed Vanessa on administrative leave and revoked her access to company systems. The third suspended Nathan as chief executive officer, with pay, until the forensic audit and conflict review were complete. Thomas would serve as interim CEO. The trust's votes were enough to pass each resolution. Still, Evelyn asked every director to vote individually. One by one, hands rose. Even 2 directors Nathan had appointed voted yes. Thomas was last. His voice was quiet, yes. Nathan remained standing after the meeting adjourned. Vanessa left without waiting for him. At the door, Nathan said, Eve. She stopped. You planned this. I learned about the trust after you filed. My father set me up. Your father protected the company from exactly what you did. You humiliated me in front of my own board. Evelyn turned back. On my birthday, you sent a stranger to my door with papers saying 19 years of my life were worth less than your Mercer apartment. Do not lecture me about humiliation. His face twisted. You think this makes you important? No, she said. I think I was important before it. That is the part you never understood. She walked out of the boardroom while he was still searching for an answer. By 5 that afternoon, Nathan's suspension had reached the business press. The first headline called it a family power struggle. The second called it a boardroom coup. A television reporter stood outside Bellwether Mill and described Evelyn as the founder's previously little-known wife, a phrase that made Sophie throw a pillow at the screen. Little known, she said, you designed the building they're standing in. Evelyn muted the television. Reporters simplify what they don't understand. Then make them understand. I'm not interested in fighting your father in public. He's already fighting you. Sophie held up her phone. Nathan had released a statement saying he was temporarily stepping aside while unfounded concerns raised during a painful domestic matter were reviewed. He expressed confidence that the company would soon return to stable leadership. The message did not name Evelyn, but everyone knew who had raised the concerns. He's making you sound unstable, Sophie said. He has done that privately for years. I'm not surprised he knows how to do it publicly. Why aren't you angry? I am. You don't look angry. Evelyn unmuted the television and watched the reporter speak beneath the bellwether plaque. I spent a long time believing anger was dangerous because it might make people leave, she said. Now I'm learning anger can also tell you where a boundary should have been. Sophie sat beside her. Are you taking Dad's company? The question was not accusing, but it was frightened. No, the company does not belong to one person. Not to him and not to me. I am stopping decisions that could hurt employees, investors, and neighborhoods. Your grandfather gave me the authority to do that. Do you want Dad to lose everything? Evelyn considered the answer carefully. Yesterday morning, part of me might have. Today, I want him to face what he did. That is not always the same as losing everything. Sophie nodded, though she was not fully reassured. A child could understand betrayal and still love the person who caused it. Evelyn knew because she was doing the same thing. The following weeks became a blur of attorneys, auditors, project meetings, and sleepless nights. Naomi obtained a court order preventing either spouse from transferring major marital assets. Nathan withdrew his request for exclusive use of the lake house after learning that its renovation had been paid for partly from the Bellwether Trust. His attorney replaced the original settlement proposal with one containing 7 more pages and a much larger number. Evelyn rejected it. Not because the number was too small, though it was. She rejected it because Nathan demanded that she resign as trustee and sign a permanent confidentiality agreement, preventing her from discussing company history. He was still trying to purchase her silence. This time, she knew its value. At Carter Urban, Thomas asked Evelyn to take the title of executive chair. She refused at first. I haven't practiced architecture in 16 years, she said. You're not being asked to stamp construction drawings tomorrow. You're being asked to help the board decide what this company builds and why. I don't want a ceremonial position. Thomas laughed. Henry once said the only ceremonial thing about you was your patience, because no one could possibly be born with that much of it. Evelyn accepted on the condition that the board create an independent ethics committee and appoint an employee representative. She also requested that Riverlight be paused for 90 days while its housing commitments and community design were reviewed. The pause cost money. Investors complained. Commentators said Evelyn was an inexperienced spouse interfering with a sophisticated development. Nathan's allies whispered that she had manipulated an old man into rewriting his estate. Then the original Bellwether drawings surfaced. Thomas found the black portfolio in the company archive, where Henry had stored certified copies years before. The dates, signatures, and design records were unmistakable. So were Evelyn's Riverlight neighborhood studies, created 15 years before Nathan unveiled the project. A young planning associate, named Luis Mendoza, asked Evelyn for permission to show the drawings at an internal presentation. She agreed, expecting 20 people. More than 300 employees attended in person or online. Evelyn stood at the front of the old turbine hall while her sketches filled a projection screen behind her. She had not spoken before a professional audience in nearly 2 decades. Her first sentence came out too quietly. Then she saw the courtyard she had drawn at 25, when Carter Urban was 4 people, 1 borrowed truck, and a desk built from a door laid across filing cabinets. She remembered who she had been. The purpose of preserving an old building, she began again, is not to freeze it in time. It is to let its history serve a new life. Cities should do the same for people. Development fails when it treats existing communities as obstacles instead of foundations. The room became completely still. She spoke for 40 minutes without notes. She explained why mixed-income housing worked better when affordable and market-rate units shared entrances and common spaces. She showed how small courtyards created natural safety through visibility and neighbor contact. She described childcare not as a charitable extra, but as infrastructure that allowed parents to work. She criticized the current Riverlight plan, including choices Nathan had presented as inevitable. When she finished, no one moved for half a second. Then the applause began. It rose from the floor, the balconies, and the online feed playing through the speakers. Employees stood, Thomas stood. Mia from reception stood with both hands above her head. Evelyn gripped the edge of the podium. For years, she had told herself she did not need applause. She had been wrong. No one should live only for applause, but there are moments when being seen repairs something that silence has damaged. That evening, a video of the presentation appeared online. By morning, it had been viewed more than 1 million times. Urban planning professors shared it. Housing advocates quoted it. Former Carter urban employees posted photographs of Evelyn working at Bellwether in the early years. The public story changed. She was no longer the little-known wife in a domestic power struggle. She was a founder whose name had been missing. Nathan called her just after midnight. "You leaked the drawings," he said. Evelyn was sitting at the kitchen table in pajamas, reviewing applications for the Riverlight Community Advisory Panel. No, employees shared them after the presentation. "You knew what would happen. I hoped people would discuss the project. They're calling me a fraud. I did not call you that. You stood in my building and implied I stole your work." "Our building," Evelyn said, and I described the documented history. "I gave those ideas scale, you had sketches, I created a company capable of building them." "That is true." The agreement seemed to disorient him. Evelyn continued, "You were an extraordinary salesman and a fearless builder. You persuaded banks to finance projects they considered impossible. You solved problems I could not solve. Why wasn't that enough? Why did my contribution have to disappear for yours to matter?" Nathan said nothing. For a moment, she thought the call had ended. Then he said, "People wanted one story. So you gave them one. It was easier. For you." Another silence. "Vanessa says the audit team is targeting her," he said. "The documents are targeting her. She thinks you want her prosecuted." "I want the truth established. What happens after that depends on what she did." "And what about me?" Evelyn closed the Riverlight file. "What did you do, Nathan?" "I signed agreements based on her recommendations." "Did you expect to receive Mercer equity after our divorce?" He did not answer. "Did you?" "Yes." The word sounded smaller than she expected. "Then you had a personal interest in moving value out of Carter Urban." "I believed the structure would let us develop faster, without Henry's restrictions." Henry's restrictions protected affordable housing and required board review. They were outdated. They were inconvenient. "You always make everything moral." "No, you spent years calling moral questions business decisions, so no one could challenge you." His breathing changed. "I miss Sophie," he said. The turn was so sudden that Evelyn closed her eyes. "She misses you too." "She won't answer my calls. She needs time." "You're turning her against me." "No, I have corrected her when she called you names. I have told her you love her. I have also refused to lie about why you left." "What am I supposed to do?" "For once, do not ask me to manage the consequences of your choices." She ended the call before he could answer. 2 days later, Sophie agreed to meet Nathan for lunch. Evelyn drove her to the restaurant but stayed in the car. Rain streaked the windshield while she waited, remembering all the school pickups Nathan had missed and all the times she had invented reasons for him. Sophie returned after 23 minutes. She climbed into the passenger seat and closed the door carefully. "How was it?" Evelyn asked. "He brought Vanessa." Evelyn's hands tightened around the steering wheel. "He did what?" "He said he wanted us to meet because she's important to him. She kept telling me she never wanted to hurt anyone. Then she said families change and mature people accept new realities." "What did your father say?" "Mostly nothing." Sophie stared through the windshield. "I asked if they were together while Grandpa was sick. Dad said adult relationships are complicated. Vanessa said their connection helped him survive a difficult period." "I'm sorry." "I told them Grandma survived cancer without sleeping with a coworker." A startled laugh escaped Evelyn before she could stop it. Sophie laughed too, then began crying. Evelyn reached across the console and held her hand. "He wants me to spend Thanksgiving at the Mercer apartment," Sophie said. "You do not have to decide today." "I already did. You can love him and still refuse something that hurts you." "Is that what you're doing?" Evelyn looked at their joined hands. "I'm trying." The final audit report arrived in December. It concluded that Vanessa had created the Mercer structure, concealed material conflicts, altered internal approval records, and directed employees to delete correspondence. Nathan had approved key transactions and expected personal benefit, but auditors found no evidence that he had directly taken company funds for personal use. His conduct was serious enough for removal and civil claims, though criminal decisions belonged to prosecutors. When the board met, Nathan did not attend. Vanessa's attorney sent a letter threatening litigation. By the end of the week, she resigned. Carter Urban sued Mercer Strategic to cancel the parcel options and recover the consulting payments. The matter was referred to authorities, though Evelyn instructed the company's lawyers to make no public predictions about charges. Nathan submitted his own resignation 3 days later. His letter was 5 sentences long. He thanked employees, praised the company's history, denied intentional wrongdoing, and said he was leaving to protect Carter Urban from further distraction. He did not mention Evelyn. But attached to the private board copy was a handwritten note. "You won, I hope it was worth it." Evelyn placed the note beside the divorce papers in her desk. Then she wrote beneath it, "There should never have been a contest." Winter settled over the city. The divorce moved more slowly than the headlines had predicted. Public drama could change in a day. Legal endings were built from inventories, valuations, depositions, and calendars crowded with delays. Evelyn learned the strange vocabulary of dissolving a shared life. Marital asset, separate property, equitable distribution, exclusive possession. Each phrase attempted to place a clean label on something that had never been clean. How could a form measure 19 years of caring for Nathan's mother, raising their daughter, hosting investors, revising presentations at midnight, and surrendering opportunities no one had recorded? How could an accountant calculate the value of always being the person who stayed home when someone had to? Naomi tried. She built the case with documents, witnesses, old calendars, tax records, and company files. The numbers changed dramatically. The founder units were recognized. The house was partly marital property. Nathan's Carter Urban distributions were subject to division. His expected interest in Mercer Strategic became evidence of financial misconduct rather than a future reward. By spring, Nathan's attorney requested mediation. They met in a private conference center overlooking the river. Evelyn arrived with Naomi and Margaret. Nathan arrived alone with his lawyer. He looked older than he had 6 months earlier. Without assistants managing his schedule and photographers choosing the angle, the sharpness around him seemed less like confidence and more like fatigue. Vanessa was gone. Evelyn had not asked for details, but the city provided them anyway. Vanessa moved to another state after Mercer Strategic collapsed. She and Nathan ended their relationship shortly after the audit report. A former employee told Thomas that they had begun blaming each other the moment the board suspended them. Evelyn took no pleasure in it. Some relationships were built from the belief that 2 people were escaping the same enemy. Once the enemy disappeared, they discovered they had little else in common. The mediation lasted 9 hours. Nathan wanted to retain his economic interest in Carter Urban. Evelyn agreed, provided he surrendered all voting authority for 10 years, repaid amounts identified in the civil settlement, and accepted permanent conflict of interest restrictions if he ever returned to company work. He expected her to demand the lake house. She did not. "I never liked it," she told Naomi during a break. Nathan bought it because he thought successful people were supposed to own one. Evelyn kept the family home until Sophie finished college, after which she could sell it or buy out Nathan's remaining interest. She received a fair share of investment assets, immediate liquidity, and full recognition of her founder units. She refused lifetime support. Naomi objected, "You are entitled to it." "I know, that is why refusing it is a choice, not surrender." Instead, Evelyn negotiated a single equalization payment and required Nathan to fund the college account they had promised Sophie. Near the end of the day, the lawyers left the room to resolve tax language. For the first time since the divorce filing, Evelyn and Nathan sat alone together. The river below them reflected the orange light of sunset. Construction cranes stood along the far bank, including two belonging to Carter Urban. Nathan turned a paper cup between his hands. "You could have taken more," he said. "And yes. Why didn't you?" "Because I asked for what was fair." "You removed me from the company." "You removed yourself when you placed your interests above it." He looked at her. "Do you ever get tired of being right?" "I spent 19 years being told I was wrong. I'm still adjusting." To her surprise, Nathan smiled. It was brief and sad but real. "I watched your Riverlight presentation," he said. "I know." "How?" "The viewer list included your account." "I watched it 3 times." Evelyn waited. "You were good," he said. Once, those words would have meant everything to her. She would have carried them for months, using them to excuse the next absence or insult. Now they were simply true. "I am good," she said. Nathan looked down. "My father saw it." "And yes, I did too at the beginning." "What changed?" He took so long to answer that she thought he might not. "People started introducing me as the genius behind Bellwether. The first few times I corrected them. Then I stopped. Then I began telling the story that way myself. Every time I repeated it, it became harder to admit it wasn't the whole truth." Evelyn felt the old ache, but it no longer controlled her. "And me. You reminded me of who I was before people believed the story. So you pushed me out of it." "And yes." The honesty was brutal and, in its own way, merciful. Nathan rubbed his thumb along the cup's paper seam. "Vanessa never questioned the story." "That was what you loved." "I think so." Outside, a barge moved slowly down the river. "I'm sorry about your birthday," he said. Evelyn almost laughed at the smallness of the sentence compared with everything surrounding it. "Only my birthday." His eyes filled. "No." He looked toward the river because he could not look at her. "I'm sorry I made your sacrifices sound like preferences. I'm sorry I used your work and then acted threatened when you remembered it was yours. I'm sorry I let Sophie find out the way she did. I'm sorry I brought Vanessa to lunch with her. I thought if Sophie accepted the new life quickly, it would prove I hadn't done something terrible." He swallowed. "And I'm sorry I offered you that settlement. I knew it wasn't fair. Vanessa said we needed to finish the divorce before anyone examined Mercer too closely. I told myself you would be comfortable and that money had never mattered to you." "Money mattered, Nathan. I only trusted you to handle it." "I know that now." Evelyn watched him for a long moment. "I believe you are sorry," she said. Hope rose too quickly in his face. She continued, "But forgiveness does not restore access to the life you damaged. It only means I no longer want to carry the damage everywhere I go." The hope changed into understanding. "Is there any chance for us?" he asked. "No." Her answer came without anger. Nathan closed his eyes. The lawyers returned 2 minutes later. By 9 that evening, the major terms were signed. The divorce became final on June 14th, a clear Monday morning with no reporters outside the courthouse. Evelyn expected to feel either freedom or grief. She felt both. She stood on the courthouse steps with Naomi, holding a thin folder that legally ended almost half her life. Across the street, Nathan entered a waiting car. Before the door closed, he looked back. Evelyn raised one hand. He did the same. Then they went in different directions. That summer, Evelyn completed the requirements to reactivate her architectural license. She studied updated building codes late at night, sometimes with Sophie quizzing her from the kitchen counter. She failed one practice examination, passed the next, and laughed louder than she had in years when the official approval arrived. At Carter Urban, the Riverlight redesign moved forward. The revised plan restored 30% affordable housing, added the childcare cooperative, protected river access, and reduced the height of two luxury towers to preserve sunlight in the public courtyards. Investors resisted until new financial models showed that public grants, long-term occupancy, and mixed commercial leases could offset the changes. Evelyn did not get everything she wanted. Real work was not a triumphant speech followed by perfect agreement. It was compromise, revision, budgets, and knowing which principles could bend without breaking. She loved it. Sophie graduated from high school in June. Nathan attended and sat 3 rows behind Evelyn. When Sophie crossed the stage, both of them stood at the same time. Afterward, Sophie took photographs with each parent separately. Then she looked between them and said, "One together for me." Nathan stood on her right, Evelyn stood on her left. They did not touch, but Sophie linked arms with both of them. The photograph was not the picture of a repaired marriage. It was proof that a family could change shape without requiring a child to choose only one half of her history. Nathan began seeing Sophie for breakfast every other Sunday. He arrived on time. When work opportunities took him out of town, he told her in advance instead of asking Evelyn to create an excuse. He never returned to Carter Urban. He began consulting for smaller development companies and, according to Sophie, rented an apartment with a view of the railroad tracks. It was not the life he had imagined with Vanessa, but it was honest enough to begin again. On the morning of Evelyn's 44th birthday, she woke before sunrise. For a moment, she lay still, remembering the doorbell 1 year earlier. The memory no longer felt like a blade. It felt like a scar she could touch without reopening. Sophie had already left for college orientation, and the house was quiet. Evelyn made coffee, put on the pale blue robe, and carried her cup to the front door. At 7:12, the bell rang. Her heart jumped despite everything. She opened the door. Thomas stood on the porch, holding an enormous bouquet of yellow roses. Behind him, Mia held a cake box, Louis carried balloons, and at least 20 Carter Urban employees crowded the walkway. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn asked. Thomas grinned. "You have a meeting." I checked my calendar. "Not this one." They drove her to Bellwether Mill. The courtyard was filled with people. Employees, city planners, neighborhood representatives, construction workers, former colleagues, and families selected for the first Riverlight housing phase stood beneath strings of gold flags. Sophie waited near the entrance, having secretly returned the night before. Margaret, Naomi, and David were beside her. Even Nathan stood at the back of the crowd. Evelyn stopped walking. "What is this?" Sophie took her hand. "The surprise Dad should have given you last year." A cloth covered the brass plaque near the main entrance. Thomas invited Evelyn to pull the cord. The cloth fell. The old plaque was gone. The new one read, BLLWATHER Mill. Reborn through the shared vision of Evelyn Marie Carter, architect and co-founder. Henry Carter, builder and mentor. And Nathanil J. Carter, developer and co-founder. May every future built here honor the hands that made its foundation. Evelyn read the words through tears. Nathan's name remained. So did hers. History had not been corrected by erasing him. It had been corrected by making room for the truth. Thomas handed her a narrow package. Inside was the old black portfolio, restored and rebound. The grocery receipt sketches had been preserved behind archival sheets. On the final page was a photograph Evelyn had never seen. She was 25, standing in the muddy Bellwether courtyard in work boots and a hard hat, laughing as she held a rolled plan over one shoulder. Nathan stood beside her, young and hopeful. Henry was behind them, one hand on each of their backs. On the reverse, Henry had written, "The day the 3 of us believed before anyone else did." Evelyn pressed the photograph to her chest. She had once thought the greatest surprise, after the divorce papers, was discovering she controlled the company. It was not. Power had protected her, money had given her choices, the truth had restored her name. But the real surprise was realizing that the life she feared losing had never been the fullest life available to her. She had believed the divorce meant she was being removed from the future. Instead, it removed the wall between her and herself. Thomas asked her to say a few words. Evelyn stepped beneath the new plaque and looked at the people gathered in the courtyard she had drawn nearly 2 decades before. Sophie smiled at her from the front row. Nathan stood farther back, his hands in his pockets. When their eyes met, he nodded once. Evelyn turned toward the microphone. 1 year ago today, she began, a stranger came to my door and handed me papers that made me believe my life had been reduced to a list of things someone else had decided I deserved. The courtyard became quiet. I thought I had lost my marriage, my security, my history, and the future I had spent 19 years protecting. Some of those things were lost, some needed to be. But I learned that when another person refuses to recognize your value does not disappear. It only becomes your responsibility to stop placing it in their hands. She looked up at the preserved brick walls. This building taught me that an ending does not always require demolition. Sometimes the strongest parts can remain. Sometimes what was hidden can be uncovered. Sometimes a place or a person can be rebuilt without pretending there was never any damage. Sophie wiped her eyes. Evelyn smiled. So today, I am grateful for the people who told the truth, the people who protected what mattered, and even the painful moment that forced me to remember who I was. I would not choose the way that birthday began, but I am deeply thankful for the woman who came out of it. The applause filled the courtyard. This time, Evelyn did not shrink from it. She stood beneath her own name and allowed herself to be seen. Later, after the cake had been cut and the crowd had begun to thin, Sophie found her near the river. "Best birthday?" Sophie asked. Evelyn considered the question. "The most honest one." Sophie leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. Across the water, construction had begun on Riverlight. The first foundations were being prepared, deep beneath the surface where no future resident would ever see them. Evelyn understood foundations better now. They were not glamorous, they received no sunlight. People rarely praised them once the beautiful parts rose above the ground. But hidden did not mean unimportant. And being taken for granted did not mean being without value. For years, Evelyn had been the foundation, beneath someone else's name. Now she was building in the light. And that was the real surprise waiting after the papers, after the betrayal, after the ending she had feared. Her life had not ended on her 43rd birthday. It had finally been returned to her. If this story touched your heart, share in the comments the moment you realized an ending was actually a new beginning. And wherever you are listening from tonight, remember this: someone else's failure to see your worth can never become proof that it is not there.